The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her tactical vest one final time before stepping onto the combat training mat. At 24, she had already proven herself through the grueling months of basic training, but today marked her first advanced hand-to-hand combat session with the Elite SEAL Training Unit. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 16. Growing up in rural Montana, she had watched her older brother Jake struggle with PTSD after his deployment in Afghanistan. The helplessness she felt watching him suffer had ignited a fire within her to serve, to make a difference, to be part of something greater than herself. Now, standing among 30 other trainees, she was one of only 3 women who had made it this far in the program. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy. Concrete walls lined with various weapons and training equipment surrounded them. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed steadily, casting harsh shadows that made every trainee look more intimidating than they probably felt. The smell of sweat, rubber mats, and cleaning solvent filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both sterile and intense. Instructor Martinez, a compact man with weathered hands and sharp eyes, began calling out pairs for sparring matches. Sarah listened intently, her heart rate steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had trained for this. Hours of martial arts training, strength conditioning, and mental preparation had led to this moment. Mitchell, you're up with Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams, Martinez announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. 4-person drill. Scenario training. Sarah nodded and moved toward the designated mat area. She recognized the 3 men she'd been paired with. All of them had been in her basic training cohort, though they had rarely interacted beyond the necessary team exercises. David Thompson was tall and lean, with the kind of confident swagger that often masked insecurity. Marcus Rodriguez had a stockier build and kept mostly to himself, but she noticed his tendency to make snide comments when he thought instructors weren't listening. James Williams was the quietest of the 3, but something in his eyes had always made Sarah uncomfortable during group training sessions. As they gathered in the center of the mat, Instructor Martinez explained the drill. This is a realistic scenario training exercise. You'll be working with rubber training knives. The objective is to demonstrate proper disarmament techniques and tactical awareness. Remember, this is about learning, not winning. The rubber training weapons were distributed, their black handles worn smooth from countless previous exercises. Sarah gripped hers firmly, feeling its weight and balance. Despite being a training tool, it felt substantial in her hand, and she reminded herself that proper technique was crucial even with non-lethal equipment. What happened next would later be described in incident reports and witness statements, but in the moment, it unfolded with shocking speed. As the drill began, Sarah noticed something was wrong immediately. The 3 men weren't following the prescribed training protocol. Instead of the controlled, technique-focused exercise they were supposed to be performing, they seemed to have their own agenda. Thompson moved first, not towards Sarah's weapon hand as the drill required, but toward her uniform instead. The rubber blade caught the fabric of her training shirt near the shoulder, and she heard the distinct sound of tearing material. Confusion flashed across her face as she stepped back, trying to understand what was happening. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice steady despite her growing alarm. Rodriguez and Williams moved to flank her, their training knives held in positions that had nothing to do with the exercise they were supposed to be practicing. The look in their eyes told her this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding of the drill instructions. "Just having a little fun," Williams muttered, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to where Instructor Martinez was observing another group's exercise. Sarah's training kicked in. She had learned to read situations quickly, to assess threats, and respond appropriately. What she was seeing didn't make sense in the context of a military training exercise, but the intent behind their actions was becoming clear. They weren't trying to disarm her. They were trying to humiliate her. Thompson made another move with his rubber blade, this time catching the fabric near her collar. Another tear appeared in her uniform, and Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. She had worked too hard and come too far to let three insecure men derail her training over whatever twisted game they thought they were playing. "Stop this right now," she said, her voice carrying enough authority that a few nearby trainees glanced over. But Rodriguez was already moving, his training knife aimed at the side seam of her tactical pants. The rubber blade caught the fabric and pulled, creating another visible tear. Sarah realized with growing alarm that they were systematically trying to damage her uniform, to humiliate her in front of the entire training group. The psychological warfare was as deliberate as it was cruel. They knew that reporting the incident would likely result in an investigation that could delay or derail her training progress. They knew that fighting back against three opponents would look like an escalation on her part. They had calculated this moment, chosen their timing when most of the instructors were focused elsewhere, and decided that she was an acceptable target for whatever frustrations or prejudices they carried. Sarah's military training had taught her to think tactically, to find solutions under pressure. But it had also taught her about honor, about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. These three men were counting on her reluctance to make a scene, on her desire to blend in and prove she belonged. They had miscalculated. As Williams moved to make another cut with his rubber blade, Sarah shifted her weight and prepared to defend herself properly. But before she could act, she noticed a change in the atmosphere around them. The other trainees had begun to notice what was happening, and their conversations were dying away as they turned to watch. More importantly, she caught sight of a figure moving through the crowd with purposeful strides. Someone had noticed what was happening, and from the way the other trainees were quickly stepping aside to create a clear path, she knew that someone had the authority to do something about it. The three men were so focused on their harassment that they hadn't noticed the approaching figure. Thompson raised his rubber blade again, aiming for another section of Sarah's uniform, his face showing a mix of excitement and malicious enjoyment that made her stomach turn. That's when everything changed. The approaching footsteps had belonged to Chief Petty Officer Michael Reaper Davidson, a SEAL instructor whose reputation preceded him throughout the entire naval special warfare community. Davidson was not scheduled to be in the training facility that day, but he had stopped by to review training reports with Martinez. What he saw unfolding on the mat triggered something deep and immediate in his combat-trained instincts. Sarah saw recognition dawn in Thompson's eyes just a split second before Davidson reached them. The color drained from all three men's faces as they realized their carefully orchestrated harassment had gained an audience they definitely hadn't wanted. Davidson's voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the vicinity freeze in place. "Gentlemen, I believe you're confused about the training protocol." The way he said the word, gentlemen, made it clear he was using the term ironically. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams found themselves facing someone whose presence alone commanded more respect than they had collectively earned in their entire military careers to that point. What happened next would become legendary among the training groups that came after, a story told and retold as both a cautionary tale and an example of what happened when someone crossed the line from tough training into harassment and intimidation. Chief Petty Officer Michael Davidson had earned his nickname Reaper through 15 years of active combat service across 3 different theaters of operation. He had survived situations that most people couldn't imagine, made split-second decisions under fire, and led men through circumstances where failure meant death. But what he was witnessing on the training mat triggered a different kind of response than anything he had experienced in combat zones. Davidson had grown up with 3 sisters. His mother had raised 4 children as a single parent while his father served overseas, and he had learned early that protecting those who were being targeted by bullies wasn't just about physical strength. It was about character. Watching 3 grown men systematically humiliate a female trainee violated every principle he had spent his career upholding. "Drop your weapons," Davidson said, his voice carrying across the now silent training facility. The command wasn't loud, but it had the kind of authority that made compliance automatic. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams let their rubber training knives fall to the mat, the soft thud of each one hitting the ground seeming unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Sarah stood perfectly still, her torn uniform evidence of what had been happening, but her posture straight and her eyes alert. Davidson noticed immediately that despite being outnumbered and targeted, she hadn't panicked, hadn't called for help, and hadn't backed down. The determination in her stance told him everything he needed to know about her character. "Miss Mitchell," Davidson said, turning his attention to Sarah, but keeping the three men in his peripheral vision. "Are you injured?" "No, Chief," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Just some damage to my uniform." Davidson nodded, then turned his full attention to Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams. The three men looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor, but there was nowhere to go. Every other trainee in the facility had stopped what they were doing to watch what would happen next. "Gentlemen," Davidson began, his tone conversational, but with an edge that made everyone listening pay close attention. "In my 15 years of active duty, I've had the privilege of serving alongside some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. I've seen courage under fire, sacrifice for teammates, and honor in the face of impossible odds." He paused, letting his words settle before continuing. "What I just witnessed here was none of those things. What I saw was three grown men ganging up on one person because they thought they could get away with it." Thompson opened his mouth as if to speak, but Davidson held up a hand that immediately silenced him. "You're not going to talk your way out of this," Davidson said. "You're going to listen, and then you're going to learn something about what it really means to be a warrior." The entire facility had gone dead quiet. Even Instructor Martinez had stopped what he was doing to watch what was unfolding. Davidson's reputation meant that when he spoke, people listened, but this was different. This felt like a teaching moment that would be remembered long after the current training cycle was complete. "The three of you seem to think that teamwork means picking on someone you perceive as weaker," Davidson continued. "You've confused aggression with strength, intimidation with leadership. Let me show you what real strength looks like." What happened next would be talked about for years afterward. Davidson moved with a speed and precision that reminded everyone present why SEAL instructors were considered among the elite special operations forces in the world. But this wasn't about showing off his skills. It was about delivering a lesson that these three men and everyone watching would never forget. "Thompson," Davidson said, "you seem to think you're pretty good with that training knife. Let's see how good you really are." Davidson picked up one of the rubber training weapons from the mat, holding it casually in his right hand. "Come at me with everything you've got. Don't hold back. Show me what you were planning to do to Miss Mitchell." Thompson hesitated, clearly understanding that this was not going to end well for him, but also knowing that refusing a direct order from a chief petty officer would have even worse consequences. He picked up his training knife and moved into what he probably thought was an intimidating combat stance. Davidson waited perfectly still until Thompson committed to his attack. When it came, Davidson's response was swift and decisive. He stepped slightly to one side, caught Thompson's wrist with his left hand, and used the man's own momentum to send him tumbling to the mat. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds, and Thompson found himself flat on his back with Davidson's rubber blade at his throat. "Rodriguez, your turn," Davidson said, helping Thompson to his feet with surprising gentleness. "Let's see what you've got." Rodriguez had just watched his teammate get taken down effortlessly, so he tried a different approach. He attempted to circle around Davidson, looking for an opening, tried to use footwork and positioning to his advantage. Davidson watched him move for several seconds, then simply stepped forward and executed a disarming technique so smooth and fast that Rodriguez found his weapon flying across the mat before he realized what had happened. A moment later, he was face down on the mat with Davidson's knee on his back and the rubber blade touching the base of his neck. "Williams," Davidson said as he released Rodriguez and turned to the third man. "You're the smart one, aren't you? You hang back and let your friends do the dirty work while you watch. What's your plan here?" Williams looked like he was seriously considering running, but there was nowhere to go. The other trainees had formed an impromptu circle around the mat, and every instructor in the facility was now watching. He picked up his training weapon with obvious reluctance. Unlike the first two men, Williams tried to be defensive, keeping his distance, waiting for Davidson to make the first move. It was actually a smarter tactical approach, but against someone with Davidson's skills and experience, it only delayed the inevitable. Davidson feinted left, then moved right, closing the distance faster than Williams could react. A moment later, Williams was on the ground with Davidson standing over him, the training knife having been removed from his grip so quickly that he wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. The entire demonstration had taken less than 5 minutes. 3 men who had thought they were tough enough to intimidate a fellow trainee had been systematically and effortlessly neutralized by someone who understood what real combat skills looked like. But Davidson wasn't finished with his lesson. "Get up, all 3 of you," he said, his voice still calm but carrying absolute authority. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams scrambled to their feet, each of them looking shaken and humiliated. "Here's what you don't understand about being a warrior," Davidson continued, making eye contact with each of them in turn. "Real strength isn't about overpowering someone weaker than you. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Real courage isn't about attacking someone who's outnumbered. It's about standing up to bullies even when you're the one who's outnumbered." He gestured towards Sarah, who had watched the entire demonstration with professional interest but without any visible satisfaction at seeing her tormentors taken down. "Miss Mitchell showed more warrior spirit standing there alone against 3 of you than you 3 have shown in your entire time in this program," Davidson said. "She didn't back down, she didn't call for help, and she didn't compromise her integrity. Those are the qualities we're looking for in special operations personnel." The silence in the training facility was complete. Every person present understood that they were witnessing something significant, a moment that would shape how they thought about service, honor, and what it meant to be part of an elite military unit. Davidson turned his attention back to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, your uniform is damaged, but your performance under pressure was outstanding. That's the kind of composure and determination we need in special operations." Then he faced the 3 men again, and his expression hardened. "As for you 3, you've just demonstrated that you don't understand the most basic principles of military service. You've shown that you're willing to use your training to target teammates rather than protect them. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." What Davidson said next would determine not just the immediate consequences for Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams, but would send a message to every trainee in the program about what kind of behavior was acceptable and what would result in immediate consequences. The aftermath of Chief Petty Officer Davidson's intervention rippled through the Naval Special Warfare Training Program like a stone thrown into still water. Within an hour of the incident, Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams found themselves sitting in the program director's office, their military careers hanging in the balance. Davidson had made his position clear to the administrative staff. These 3 demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to serve alongside their teammates, he told Commander Patricia Hayes, who oversaw the training program. They used their military training to intimidate and humiliate a fellow service member. That's not just a discipline problem, it's a character problem. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Multiple witnesses confirmed what had happened on the training mat. Security camera footage from the facility captured the entire incident, from the initial harassment to Davidson's demonstration of proper combat techniques. Most damaging of all, it became clear that this hadn't been a spontaneous incident. The 3 men had planned their attack on Sarah's uniform and had chosen their timing deliberately. Thompson, who had initiated the harassment, was immediately dropped from the Special Operations Training Program. His service record would reflect the incident, and his chances of advancement in any military career were effectively ended. Rodriguez and Williams faced similar consequences, their dreams of becoming special operations personnel vanishing in a matter of hours. But the real impact of the incident went far beyond the immediate consequences for 3 bullies. Commander Hayes called an all-hands meeting the following morning, addressing every trainee in the program. What happened yesterday represents everything this program stands against, she told the assembled group. Special operations personnel are entrusted with extraordinary responsibilities precisely because they are expected to demonstrate extraordinary character. When you graduate from this program, you will be asked to protect American citizens, to defend people who cannot defend themselves, and to uphold the highest standards of military conduct even in the most challenging circumstances. She paused, making eye contact with trainees throughout the room. If you cannot demonstrate those qualities here, in a controlled training environment, surrounded by your teammates, then you have no business carrying the Special Operations designation into combat zones where the stakes are life and death. The message was clear. The military was serious about maintaining the integrity of its elite units, and behavior like what Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams had displayed would not be tolerated under any circumstances. For Sarah Mitchell, the incident marked a turning point in her military career, though not in the way anyone might have expected. Rather than being grateful for Davidson's intervention, she approached him privately after the all-hands meeting to discuss what had happened. "Chief, I appreciate what you did," she said, "but I need you to understand something. I didn't need rescuing. I was handling the situation." Davidson studied her for a moment before responding. "I know you were. That's exactly why I intervened when I did." Sarah looked puzzled, so Davidson explained. "You were about to take on 3 opponents simultaneously. You probably would have won, given your training and their obvious lack of real combat skills. But winning that fight would have created a different kind of problem for you. There would have been questions about whether you used excessive force, whether you escalated the situation unnecessarily. Your career would have been derailed by paperwork and investigations." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes the best way to protect someone isn't to rescue them from a fight they can't win. Sometimes it's to rescue them from a fight they can win, but shouldn't have to. Sarah considered this, recognizing the wisdom in Davidson's approach. By intervening when he did, he had not only stopped the harassment, but had done so in a way that clearly established where the fault lay and what the consequences would be. "There's something else," Davidson continued. "Your performance under pressure yesterday, remaining calm, not escalating, maintaining your professionalism even while being targeted, that showed me more about your character than any training exercise could. You're going to make an outstanding special operations officer." The prediction proved accurate. Sarah not only completed the special operations training program, but graduated at the top of her class. Her instructors noted her exceptional composure under pressure, her ability to work effectively with teammates from diverse backgrounds, and her unwavering commitment to protecting others. Years later, when she was serving as a special operations officer herself, Sarah would often think about the lessons learned from that incident on the training mat. The experience had taught her about the difference between strength and bullying, about the importance of standing up for what's right even when you're outnumbered, and about the kind of leadership that protects people rather than exploiting them. Chief Petty Officer Davidson continued his career with the SEAL training program, eventually retiring after 25 years of service. His intervention that day became part of the unofficial curriculum, a story told to new trainees about what it really meant to be a warrior and what kind of behavior was expected from special operations personnel. The training facility itself underwent some changes in the wake of the incident. New protocols were established for monitoring trainee interactions, and additional emphasis was placed on the psychological and ethical components of special operations training. The message was clear: technical skills were important, but character was paramount. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Williams all left the military within a year of the incident. Their service records followed them into civilian life, making certain career paths difficult or impossible. Thompson eventually found work in private security, though he never achieved the kind of success he had envisioned during his military service. Rodriguez returned to his hometown and took a job in construction, while Williams struggled for years to find stable employment. The contrast between their trajectories and Sarah's was stark, but it illustrated an important truth about military service and life in general. Character matters. How you treat people when you think no one important is watching reveals who you really are, and those revelations have consequences that extend far beyond any single incident. For the other trainees who witnessed the event, it became a defining moment in their understanding of what military service meant. They had seen what happened when someone confused aggression with strength, when people used their training to intimidate rather than protect. They had also seen what real leadership looked like when Chief Davidson stepped in to address the situation. Many of those trainees went on to successful military careers, and they carried the lessons from that day with them. When they encountered bullying or harassment in their own commands, they remembered Davidson's intervention and found the courage to speak up. When they were placed in leadership positions themselves, they remembered how Davidson had protected someone who was being targeted and made sure to create environments where similar harassment couldn't take root. The ripple effects of that single incident on the training mat continued for years, influencing how hundreds of service members approach their duties and their relationships with their teammates. It demonstrated that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against foreign enemies, but against the worst impulses within our own ranks. Sarah Mitchell eventually left active duty military service, but remained in government work, specializing in protecting vulnerable populations and investigating cases of abuse and harassment. Her experience on the training mat had given her unique insights into how power dynamics worked and how important it was to have systems in place to protect people who were being targeted. She never forgot the lesson that Chief Davidson had taught through his actions that day. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is protect someone else. Real warriors don't prey on the vulnerable. They stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. The incident also highlighted something important about military culture and how it was evolving. The old model of military training, which often included hazing and intimidation as rites of passage, was giving way to a more professional approach that recognized the importance of treating all service members with dignity and respect. This wasn't about lowering standards or making training easier. If anything, the standards became higher as military leaders recognized that they needed personnel who could think clearly under pressure, work effectively with diverse teams, and make sound ethical decisions in complex situations. Bullies and harassers, regardless of their technical skills, simply didn't meet those standards. The story became part of the institutional memory at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, passed down from instructor to trainee as an example of how to handle harassment and what consequences awaited those who chose intimidation over honor. And somewhere in that institutional memory was the recognition that the most important battles for the soul of the military weren't fought in distant countries against foreign adversaries. They were fought in training facilities and barracks and mess halls, in the daily interactions between service members who were learning what it meant to serve something greater than themselves. The incident on the training mat was just one such battle, but it was an important one, and the good guys won.